sounds good. Thanks, Matt. Thanks everybody for coming. You know, they wasn't sure what the weather was going to do today, and glad it's going to stay fairly rainy instead of sleet out there. So, but yeah, we're excited to be here. Thanks, Farm Bread Services of America, for letting us host here. Appreciate that. Our office is kind of small and not really great for hosting meetings like this, so this is a great place to do that. So that's really exciting. If you haven't heard of Lenavi, like Matt said, previously we were Deliveron. We were essentially acquired by a company called Greenhouse Data about 3-4 years ago, and then we did digital consulting and DevOps and cloud enablement. They did more managed services, hosting, and so the names of either really didn't match, so we decided to essentially rebrand into the name Lenavi. And what's, I think, pretty exciting now is we can really help our customers from a technology standpoint from whatever they need. So what we could do is, if they need, again, to create a custom cloud native application in Azure, we can do that. If they want to basically have us help manage their existing, have you manage our existing your applications. Really across the gamut, we can help customers do that now, and so that's pretty exciting, I think, and what we do is from a Lenavi standpoint. So. Our digital consulting division is really kind of, again, that former Deliveron company, so we help create custom applications for clients there. So that's what we do, and today we're going to talk about the .NET Conf last month. I guess, how many people watched at least some of the videos at all? Oh, perfect. You guys, so great. So yeah, so we hopefully took some of the highlights here of the conference, and then Alex actually has more of kind of a deep dive on some specific stuff, talking about minimal APIs, containerization, and Azure Container Apps. So that should be pretty cool. Him going in more detail. I'm going to kind of cover the high level highlights from the conference itself there. So my name is Mike Douglas, like Matt said. I'm the vice president of our digital consulting division, and so yeah, a bunch of other stuff, but that doesn't really matter. Not very exciting. Let me turn that on so you guys can hear me. Well, it's loud. And then we'll go ahead and get started. Actually, it's right here. All right. That worked. That's always half the battle. So yeah, so just like I just said, we're going to talk, or I'm going to talk about some of the highlights, and then Alec will go into a little more detail about the specific things. So again, last month, the group had the watch party for the .NET Conf. I know I couldn't get out of work and watch it. I did try to catch a lot of the videos afterwards, so it sounds like not everybody's caught up, but what's pretty nice is they put them all online. And if you're not familiar with .NET Conf, it's kind of become Microsoft's yearly place where they announce the latest and greatest around .NET development and a lot of the surrounding technologies. It was actually started by a guy over in Iowa, or one of them. He partially started, and so that's pretty cool.
He's actually from here.
Yeah, a group, yeah, here too, yeah, probably, yeah. So, so it's pretty cool that Microsoft's kind of latched onto it, and it's become kind of their de facto, their cycle of when they have been releasing stuff. And so there's 88 videos out there, I notice here on YouTube, to watch the videos. So if there's, topics here that we're covering that you want to kind of learn more about, this is a great thing. I do also have a kind of a references page at the end. I'll send out the link to the deck if you want some more details there. So that's the .NET Conf here. So, and one of the big announcements for this year with the .NET Conf is .NET 7 was launched, and C# 11, and new F# versions and all that stuff. So that was really cool, and really more, I would say, realization of Microsoft's kind of vision for a unified platform of .NET. And if you've been using .NET on various platforms, you probably know it's been a little bit splintered. There's some like micro.NET and some other kind of flavors of .NET depending on which platform you're working on. And Microsoft's really been working on this kind of unified platform. No matter what you're building on, it's the same .NET, kind of the same base class library, and then it's all kind of different,
classes that you'd bring into that to work on those different platforms. And I think they're really close to getting all that in place now. And I know, like, kind of converting Xamarin to Maui was one of the kind of last pieces to get to all that in place. And tool-wise, I'm sure here we're preaching to the crowd, right? Or to the choir here for a lot with bot.net. But obviously you can use it on various platforms for development-wise: Visual Studio, VS Code, Command Line, other IDEs. It's cross-platform, and so it doesn't matter if you're on Windows, Linux, or Mac. You can not only build the apps there, you can also run them. That's nice. And then there's a rich ecosystem, of course, with .NET, whether that's third-party vendors, GitHub, package management system like NuGet there. So probably not too much interesting. This was pretty interesting what they kind of mentioned on here. You always kind of wonder where how .NET is loved outside of like people like us. And it's the #1 most loved framework out there, so that's actually pretty nice for the last 3 years. And on GitHub, top 5 language, C# being, and then also from the open, the .NET's obviously been open sourced, and it's one of the highest velocity projects out there, top 5 for that. So a lot of momentum there, and I think it gives us comfort that, hey, this is a good platform to build on and continuing to grow there. From a performance standpoint, this is always mind-boggling to me how they can continue to improve the .NET framework. I remember when .NET 3.1, or not, .NET Core first came out. That was their big thing, right? It was so much faster than everything, faster than Node, faster than a lot of things, and they continue to iterate and make it faster. And you can see here, I just grabbed a screenshot from the video here to represent it, but there's a ton of information they put out there on performance of .NET. You see 1,000+ performance increases there. So I don't know if that just allows us to be lazier as developers and not have to worry about stuff, but it's really nice that they continue to improve on that and make it faster. If you haven't gotten .NET 7 or tried it out yet, there's some ways to get it. If you're using Visual Studio, that's the easiest. Just go out to the installer and get the latest version of Visual Studio. So 7.4 or 17.4 started the latest with Visual Studio. So that'll get you all the latest SDKs and all the plugins and or not really plugins, but enhancements so it all works nice inside Visual Studio there. And then also if you're using something else, you can just go out there and get the SDK and download it there, and you can see all the different downloaders. So one thing to remember, and this is kind of different with now the kind of .NET Core versions of .NET, they've moved to a yearly cadence with this. And again, it kind of lines up with the .NET Conf. .NET 7 is what's called the standard term support. And what that means is it has 18 months of kind of life to it. Whereas all the even numbers, like .NET 6 is considered long-term support, and that has 3 years. And you can see here, .NET 6 will actually outlast .NET 7, but .NET 8 will be out before that too. So a lot of good iteration here. One thing I noticed here when I was looking at this chart was it reminded me .NET 3.1 or .NET Core 3.1 is really at the end of life here in the next week, December 13th. I don't know if you guys have any code out there still using .NET 3 or .NET Core 3.1. Highly recommend switching that to one of the newer .NET frameworks. And please ask questions if you guys have questions as we're going through here. So from Visual Studio 2022, a lot of changes with that too. So again, the 17.4 is the latest version. Latest versions of all like .NET, C#, etc. It's the first one that has ARM64 support, where you can actually build the application and debug it on an ARM64 processor. So that's pretty cool, because ARM64 is definitely, the ARM processor in general is definitely the direction a lot of manufacturers are going there. There's some enterprise features in Visual Studio that they've added. You can do kind of a rollback of update. There's some template stuff you can do too. Kind of interesting. The Test Explorer, if you're using that for like your testing and stuff, you can actually, now there's a reset button, you can make it say back to not run. This was one I thought was pretty cool, the dev tunnel. So you can basically if you need to make a change and have it tested, it'll create a URL for that. I was a little disappointed when I found out it was just for Power Apps and Power Automate. Maybe they'll open that up to more, but I thought that was a really nice feature that I could see being used if we're trying to just test something before we try to deploy it. So there's that. And then the last one is some tag strings. Basically now you can do, it gives you syntax highlighting by giving an attribute here. So we're going to dive into just a couple here, including tag strings. So if you see here, what it'll do is you can now add attributes to your different strings that you're defining in your classes and give it essentially what type of string that you're going to be storing in there. And then so that'll bring up different syntax highlighting here. And then also you can imagine you can create, or somebody will create like Roslyn analyzers to know whether or not that you're, this how you're using it is correct, and you can get some compiler errors instead of, well, typically these are not caught until like design time, right, or runtime, so that should be pretty cool. So migrating your existing apps, there's a couple different ways. There's the .NET Upgrade Assistant. That's not new to .NET 7, but they have updated it to support all the .NET 7 projects. So you can see various types of projects there. It's essentially a download that you do, just a NuGet package essentially. And then when you run that, you can actually analyze and upgrade your projects right there, and it'll change all the references and stuff to the .NET 7 library. The other thing that's, I think, pretty interesting is what's called an incremental upgrade. And so this to me is going to probably be more useful for like your typical projects that are more complicated. So this is like still going from like the old .NET 4.8 framework to more .NET Core type applications. And so it's pretty interesting to this, and I think it's actually a really good pattern, right? They're following the Strangler pattern to do this, and they're essentially putting a .NET or ASP.NET Core application in front of your legacy kind of .NET framework application, and then allowing you to kind of move the functionality. It'll use YARP, which is a reverse proxy. It'll basically forward all requests to the .NET implementation while you're working on converting that over to .NET Core. And so there's, I have instructions at the reference of how to do this kind of manually, but there's this extension that actually does it for you, and I want to demo it here real quick, because I thought it was pretty cool. And I'm sure you guys don't want to just watch slides all the time. All right, so let me switch over here to, actually we're just going to create a new .NET project. I don't have on my screen, so we'll just put that up there. All right, so we're just going to create a new project quick. And then we'll do the favorite legacy.NET application. We'll just call it Legacy App 2. We're using the .NET 4.8 framework, which .NET 4.8 is still a valid framework that's supported, pretty much as long as it's going to be included in Windows, which that'll probably be forever. We're going to create just a quick MVC application, nothing fancy at all. Oh, well, that's okay. I was going to uncheck the HTTPS, but that should work fine. All right, so now we have our legacy application, just a regular ASP.NET MVC application template. I won't even bother running that, we'll just save time here. And so I've installed that extension already, and so now I can choose a migrate project. So it'll actually bring up this migration wizard. I can come here, choose a new project. It'll go ahead and just add the word core to the end of it. I'll go ahead and choose .NET 7. Because that's what we're all about tonight. And then what it's going to do is actually create the new project, add the YARP as a reverse proxy and then forward all the requests from the kind of legacy application to the new .NET Core. So you can see it's done. It added the ASP.NET Core application. Gives you kind of a progress window of like where you're at. So you can see everything's still .NET Framework and nothing's .NET Core yet. And so if I go run the application, I know you guys are all going to go home and upgrade all your legacy .NET applications to .NET Core after this, so it'll be pretty cool. Let's see.
So with this, you still have to use deploy 2 items while you're going through that upgrade process?
Yeah, it'll still have the, well, I mean, more likely you'd probably already have the legacy app already deployed, right? And so you would just point to that one, and then this would add one additional app. And then as you move all the functionality over, you'll hopefully eventually be able to turn off the old one.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Strangler pattern.
This is exactly the Strangler pattern, yes. And that's what I think is pretty nice about this, is it's fairly realistic. It's not realistic is why my computer's running so slow. It's sad. This is the first like live demo with it. It's a brand new laptop. There we go. Wow, that was great. So yeah, so so this is actually, this URL is not the .NET Framework one. This is the URL for the .NET Core application. So you can see that there. And so now that we're done that, we can actually go and say, let's go ahead and migrate the controller. And it'll actually have the option to migrate that. And then it'll kind of give us all the dependencies that kind of come along with it. We'll go ahead and migrate that over. One thing I found, oops, that's actually already done. Good, should go fast. Now when we come back over to here, we can see we're now green, right? All of our code, because pretty much everything's connected to our controller, so it had to bring everything over. Imagine real applications will be more of a incremental process, hence the name there. Oops, come on. Sorry, my Zoom window is blocking my play button. There it goes. All right, so we'll go ahead and run it one more time and just kind of show how the functionality still works, but the template or the styling did not get moved over. So that's the only thing you have to probably figure out a little bit more. But so here's the website. Everything still works with the different things. We're just missing the styling. So kind of cool that this is all now in our new .NET Core application. So everybody can go upgrade all their apps now. All right.
Legacy apps that are dependent on the framework, it would just not cut it all over. Is that kind of
The what's that?
the stuff that it can't do a one-to-one mapping to? It'll just tell you, I can't cut this over, and you'll.
Yeah, it'll give you an error message. And I originally tried it with like a application, I think it was on 4.5. And so it was complaining about that. It's like, oh, you need to upgrade this to 4.8 first. So I decided to make a new application. All right, so the next thing we kind of wanted to touch on, and I think this is really interesting, is you probably saw, if you're doing any kind of like container work, you saw Docker started charging for the Docker client if you were doing like company work for a certain size there. So, a couple other vendors have started to come out different ways, so you didn't have to actually pay to have the like Docker client on your machine. And .NET 7 is no different. In .NET 7 now, you actually can build container images without having like any kind of Docker client on your machine. And you can do that as simply as doing the .NET publish command there and choosing like the image that you're going to use, or I'm sorry, I don't even know if you have to do that because I think that should still be in your Docker file, but you can actually build that there, and pretty interesting. So I don't know, Alec, did you incorporate that at all in yours at all, or is that?
It didn't. No.
No, okay. So, but yeah, you can just do the .NET publish command and not have it. So pretty nice. And you can do that even like in your pipelines and stuff too. So again, if you have agents out there, you don't have to have Docker installed on them. The next one here, talking about minimal APIs. This is something that Alec will be talking in more detail with some of the different enhancements around like unit testing and just testing in general. The one thing I just called out here was endpoint filters. So that's one of the new features that is in there. And what it does is it allows you to kind of intercept the message coming in, and you can do things like validation. You can do checking. You can do logging. In this case here, it's checking to see if like the parameter is color is red. it, and if not, it would reject it. So you can do kind of some validation type things like that with minimal APIs. So continue to make lots of enhancements, and Alec will talk more about that here coming up. gRPC, that's the kind of way to do like binary RPC or messaging, I would say, or calls out there. One of the new enhancements is you can now use Azure App Service with gRPC. So if you're familiar with like WCF, like the binary formatter, this is like that, but it's now interoperable. So you can, have a .NET called, something like Java or something else, and it'll actually work there. One of the other things they've added for gRPC is transcoding, which is kind of nice. And basically, you would previously had to create, like, if you wanted REST and gRPC, you'd have to create two separate endpoints for that. Now you can actually, they'd be separate endpoints, but like two separate kind of projects. Now you can do it all in one and actually add both and support both REST and gRPC within the same project there. So that's kind of nice. All right, so I'm going to show real quick about app services in Azure, or app services there. And so I've got a project here called gRPC Greeter. So it's a very simple application that really just echoes what you're calling. There's the service. This service was actually deployed to Azure already, or to the Azure App Service. There's just a couple changes I had to make. Let me make sure I don't miss anything on that. The program CS file here, we do have to, one of the things I did have to do is install Kestrel to kind of expose an HTTP2 endpoint here to kind of take the traffic from the app service to the actual gRPC there. So that's one change that had to be made, and then I think that's really it. And then we had published it out. And what's nice is it still just all supports like the standard publishing process that we did before. It only supports app services on Linux, so you can't use a Windows-based app service. But here you can see I just published that out a couple days ago to that. And so then we have our client to go ahead and call that. And so if I come to this, you can see we're going to basically call out to the gRPC service with the address. So I need to go to our app service to get that. So I can come here to the Greeter API, which again is just a standard app service. There's just a couple changes I had to make. So if we come down here to configuration, I had to do just a couple things to make sure this would work. One, wanted to make sure it's .NET 7. I think .NET 6 still works, but and for this we want to do .NET there. And then we had to specify 2.0 for the HTTP framework there, and then turn on this HTTP2 proxy. And so then you can see here that enables traffic worker scenarios like gRPC. And so then once we have that, you have to add this application setting to basically specify which port that we have exposed. If you remember in the code, it was 8585, so that's kind of how that wires up. And so now I can actually go here and call, take the API URL, add it to the code here, and then go to run it. But of course, Zoom is blocking that. We'll blame Zoom. And then when we run it here, you'll see that the echo command will be returned from the gRPC. And right there, a little mod.NET user group. And that's what we have in our code. So yeah, you'll see. So that's pretty cool now that you can support that, because it is, if you need to do things where you need kind of that binary transit or transport on those, that it would be a lot faster to use something like gRPC instead of a HTTP REST call. Any questions? All right, so a couple other things here before turning it over to Alec. One of the nice things is that .NET 7 has worked to simplify some of the authorization pieces in .NET. And so before, as you're probably all aware, if you're doing anything with security, you have to, when you're specifying your authentication, is you have to set, like, even if you're just creating one authentication method, you have to still specify it as the default, right? And there's a lot of code to do that. Now you can just specify specify, if you're just using one, which I imagine 90% of the time that's all we're doing, you can just add like the JWT bearer method on the end of that, and that will instantiate it and basically treat that as behind the scenes as the default. In addition to that, we don't have to put all the configuration in code. There's a new authentication section in our app settings JSON file. You can see there authentication, and we can specify the settings that we want to use for that. So that's nice. And then the other thing is we can do some endpoint specification around authorization policies. So now with each endpoint, we can actually specify, whether it requires authorization, and then anything like the claims or scope that we needed to do to protect our endpoints there. So that's kind of nice. The other part of this is pretty nice. Is like this is all on the code side that we're doing it, but we can actually now, if we're doing testing, I don't know if you guys have been doing any kind of like testing with authentication, OpenID Connect or OAuth 2, you'd always have to kind of have that STS or identity server already set up to be giving you tokens for that. Now with .NET, there's a way to actually instantiate or create those tokens locally, so you can actually do testing there, and you can see the command to do that to give you those controls. And maybe see a little bit of that here coming up too. So, all right. So the last part I wanted to show here before again going over to Alec is just the C# 11 improvements. So there's a number of improvements. Really, in general, it's amazing how many things have been added to the .NET framework or .NET in just last year. But they're continually trying to make the syntax simpler. Less boilerplate code that you have to write. There's now generic mask support, and we'll talk about that one, list patterns, required members, and then raw string literals. The raw string literals is kind of nice because strings have always been a pain in C#, and now you can just add 3 quotes around it or 4 quotes depending on what's needed and handle those. So the generic mask support is pretty nice. This apparently has been a big request that's been out there for a long time, but we've had generics forever, but you couldn't really do any kind of like arithmetic operations around that. And now with .NET 7, you can actually do that here. And in this case, we're actually doing a couple of things. We're summing up we're generating the sum, and then we're also down below generating the average. And you can see down here, we're essentially doing a sum command and then taking that and then dividing that by the count to get the average. So really nice now that we can genericize that and make that using this like I number of t, be able to do those types of operations. The one other one I wanted to show here, and I'll do a little code example of this one too, is now we can actually make fields or properties required in our classes, and this definitely helps, I think, a couple of different things. So let me just show you real quick. Oops. Here, I'm just going to create a class called attendee. Okay, so I've already done that before. We'll just call it we're all .NET users here. So we have .NET user class, which of course it's mad because I did it with the lowercase. Here, we'll go ahead and call this public. And then we'll go ahead and create our properties. So we'll just do string. Oops. This kind of freaked me out when I saw this pop up. It said last name. I already knew what I wanted to do. But we'll just go ahead and start with those two. This here, I'm sure we've all kind of worked through, like, okay, now what are we going to do with this? Are we going to make this nullable? I don't really want this to be nullable. Are we going to give it an instantiation of, empty string, whatever that is? So it's never kind of worked right. And I think with this, it kind of helps that too. So what I can actually do now is add required keyword to these, and it no longer complains that it's not filled out because it knows, you know, from a compiler standpoint that it'll always be filled out. So now we can create our .NET user, and everything is good, right? Wait, what? Just kidding. So now we get the warning, or not the warning, the error saying, hey, we can't instantiate this because our we're not filling out our fields. So here we can say first name. And there we go. Now our compiler is happy and our code can continue. So again, just another nice improvement. It's like, it seems like that should have been there for a long time. But so that's kind of our required members there.
On that one, Mike,
Yeah.
I guess my thought on that is it really enables a very nice, like, immutable object kind of scenario, right? Where you truly create an immutable object without having to create these weird constructors that we've had to do.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Does it work on record type? You created it as a class, you created it as a record, does it require work on there?
I don't know.
Because otherwise record makes it as a constructor, right?
Oh, would it? Yeah, I'm not sure. Is it just? I mean,
Yeah, just swap out class with record, I think.
I don't know if I've ever used record before. There you go. Is that what you're expecting, Brian?
Yeah, yeah, and then go, where were you using it? Yeah, okay, yeah.
So take
And then-
the first name, last name off and see if it, make sure it's.
Yeah. Yeah. But then the actual thing that record adds to there is, after you initialize it, you won't be able to change it.
By default, yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, so that makes it truly immutable. Nice. Cool. Yeah, good stuff. All right. All right, so I think that's about it here. So I'll switch over here to allow Alec to join in, or I guess he can probably join in right from there even. Not sure where you're playing it to, but I did include a number of the different links that I showed. So again, I'll make this available to the group and go from there. So I'll stop sharing, Alec, and let you.
You come over there.
So a brief introduction, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Alec Harrison, new to the Omaha area. In my free time, I like to create some quick starts or, intro to Azure kind of content out on GitHub to help people. I think when I graduated from college, big data, AI, and the cloud were all things that people always talked about very hand-wavy. And then a professor would be like, okay, cool, we're going to learn about C. And in the real world, what you're doing in a bit,
Doesn't really help you. So one thing I tried to do was like, I'm going to build one of these topics, go from there until I figure it out, move on to the next one. Surprise, people are so hand-wavy because the cloud, AI, big data, all that fun jazz is just such a deep ocean and haven't left yet. I do some work with the Iowa Microsoft Azure User Group and also the Kansas City Azure User Group, and also hosted recently the Midwest Global AI Conference. If you have any questions, I am on the .NET Slack. You can reach me there or message me on LinkedIn or however you would like to reach out to me. So for this presentation, Mike kind of mentioned we're going to go through creating a minimal API step by step, totally open to moving faster, slower. Just kind of let me know and we'll judge the rate of the room. But we're going to start with, from a very high level, going from I have nothing to I want to create a minimal API to I want to add some authorization and authentication, and then to containerize it. And while I don't have the new .NET Publish command, Azure actually has a command also to allow you to build images without using Docker. So we'll do something similar there. But to get started, we're going to start from scratch with .NET New Web. And we'll call this API. And all this does is create an empty API, fairly empty, with a GET endpoint. So this is the new format, kind of a minimal API. I think the biggest things that's kind of made me kind of consider using these or looking at them now is, as of .NET 7, there is type support, so you can actually do type checking when you do returns, which did not exist before. Authentication authorization is pretty good. And then being able to package it all up and move it. You can also start converting it to more of your more traditional structures. So you can bring in, entity framework. You can bring in your service or repository levels if you want to start building from there. I think it's just a nice quick start guide. It's nice to learn the fundamentals of C# APIs, but also it does have that extra level of complexity if you need to start building out and going down that way. So if we just do .NET run, this application is going to run. Oh, it would help if I was in the right folder. This application is going to run at whatever port it feels like to use on my Mac, which, depending on you, might be something that you don't want to have happen. So look here, we got our hello world. So there is a way to solve that. The first thing we're going to do, though, is get some packages, and I'm actually going to go and steal this. I have this kind of canned walkthrough if you want to look at this later or get a more in-depth view. But we're going to start with some packages. The first one's going to be the entity framework in memory. So that's just so while this application is running, we will have an instance of a database. Once it goes away, data goes away. The diagnostics, we're also going to have Swashbuckle, so we can test our API through a GUI. And then have JWT bearer auth. And then the containers is the last one, so we can containerize this and get it out in Azure. All right, we'll just go back here. So if we look at our program CS right now, it's pretty bare. You have your builder, you have your application. If you haven't converted from pre.NET 6 to only a program.cs, you'll start to see a lot of these things are very similar. There's just a slight little syntax, so instead of using your iService interface, you're going to instead use builder.service, and you'll see it's very similar. The syntax is just slightly different, and it can help you migrate off that. As I think moving forward, they're doing a program.cs. You can still use your builders if you're still, or your startup file if you're really attached to it or have a lot of legacy there, but I think moving forward they're trying to get away from that. So the first thing we're going to start with is, if you're a developer, it's nice to have your ports mapped to the same so you don't have to worry about conflicts or have .NET just pick whatever random port under the sun. So you can specify that here. URLs .add, and let's do http://localhost, and I like 5000, 5001 for mine. And I should take, while I'm doing this also, so the premise behind this talk was also to build kind of a Santa's API. So we'll have authorization, we'll have 2 users, we'll have Santa, we'll have elves, and then we'll go through that as well. Oop, I did not want to reinstall everything. And if we run this, you'll see the .NET application. It's going to tell us that it now sees and recognizes our 2 URLs, assuming I didn't typo anything. And we are now live on our ports, and those should be set moving forward. So we don't have to worry about whatever random port it's going to use. So the first thing we're going to do when you build an API is usually you want to start using models. So we'll build out our models, and we're going to build out a quick DB context. For the sake of time, I'm just going to copy these over, and then we'll go through those files, because there's nothing unique to minimal APIs for some of these. So I have a pre-canned child class, so every child is going to have an ID, so we can identify them. A name is good, and Santa always checks twice, so they're going to have a separate Boolean for being checked twice. They're going to have the gift of their most wanted item, which is going to be a foreign key relationship, and then they'll have the present ready for delivery. So once it's constructed, the elves mark it good, it's ready for delivery. We're then going to have a gift object, which is the object the elves are going to primarily be interacting with. Again, unique ID, the name of the gift, should the item be built, so that will trigger the queue of them so they can query and hit that and see what all items need to be built. Take something off the queue so it started building, and then marking it as complete once it's finished. And then we'll have the Santa DB context, which is just a simple context. It's specifying that we're going to have 2 DB sets. We're going to have children and gifts, and that's about it. So to pull that over to our program CS, we're going to first want to import the models and tell it we're using OpenAPI. Open API models. That's going to be for later. We're also going to use this dot so I got a little out of order here. We can just use this. So we'll pull in the DB context. Dot. And we're going to give it the Santa DB context we just created. We're going to pass in the options. And the options parameter is going to be where we specify our use in memory database. Perfect. All right, so now we have some models, we have a DB context. Next thing we're going to do is start testing our API. So that's where the OpenAPI models comes from. That's going to allow us to bring in Swagger and CodeGen. Just because I've tried to type this again, and I've fat fingered it a few times, let's just pull this over. I'm skipping ahead. All right. So this will allow us to add Swagger to our application. And if we kill this and rerun it, nope. Candidate definition, use in memory. I think we missed a using statement or two. Let's grab all these for now. And if you have any questions, feel free to shout them out too. Happy to answer them. And here's the thing that Mike was talking about. I don't have any required fields on my models, so they're just yelling at me that these could be nullable. And if I go to here, localhost, and swagger.index. Oh, what are you doing? Let's try that. Weird. That's a new one for me. Oh, duh. I forgot the use Swagger part down here at the bottom. That'll be down here. Dot use Swagger. Use Swagger. So this is configuring where our Swagger endpoint will be, or our Swagger JSON file for it to construct the UI from. V1 and there. Really? Interesting. Okay, that's a new one for me. Swagger CodeGen. Well, we can keep rolling. that should start working here as we move along.
It says HPS. You have the ports on HTTP, does that matter? That's all you have.
Oh, did I miss? I did, thank you.
It's always more careful.
This is why I try to copy and paste sometimes over typing. Live typing is always fun. All right, now let's see if that... There we go. That's what I was expecting. So now we have our UI here that we can test our endpoint. Gives us back hello world. It's a nice little GUI to test stuff. And now if we keep going, go ahead and I'm going to drop in here and steal some of our endpoints. So the format Mike kind of brought up for APIs is going to be app or app or whatever you declare it, .map, and then your method. So that's going to be your posts, your puts, your gets. So in this one, we're saying we want it at the root, and it's just going to be a Lambda expression to return the string hello world. We'll go ahead here, and I'm going to just, to make sure I don't fat finger this, let's steal some of this, and then we can walk through what it does. Might be, oh. So this section of code is going to be for the Santa API. So we're going to have a post for a child. That's going to take in your DB context up above. It's going to take in your child object. And then we're going to we'll add it to our database, which is EF core. And then we're going to save the changes, and then we're going to return a 201 created at, which is the child ID, and then the object itself. We're also going to have a get item for children. So we're going to have, for him to check his list twice, we'll have the DB, we're going to grab all the children, which is the plural name we gave to child object, and then we're going to include the virtual members, which are the wanted items. That way, so when he's checking his list, he can see what each child wants. And then finally, we're going to want to put, so when we have a child that has been checked twice, we're going to update if they're good or not. So here the logic is just we're going to grab the child. If we can't find it, we're going to return a result not found. If the child is good, was previously good, and the new Boolean is also true, saying they're good again, they can now be marked as checked twice, and the item that they want should be built. And then if they're not, we're just going to assign it to whatever is good if they don't meet the previous condition. So if they weren't good once, they're going to be good for the first time. Or if this is good as false, which means they weren't, we're going to set to whatever. Because we're already tracking those entities in Entity Framework, we don't have to instantiate or save each one individually. We can just go ahead and do save changes async and return no content for that. For the elves endpoint, I should say endpoints, plural. We're going to do something similar. And we're going to have a list of the items that need to be built. So I don't know, can you see the zoom window up there? It might be in the way. Let me see if I minimize. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab all the items that should be built and all the ones that haven't been started yet. So that'll give them a list of everything that needs to be built. We're going to do a put for the gift item, which is going to allow it to take in an ID, which is a parameter here. And then we're also going to need the DB context because we're going to want to update. First, try to find the gift to make sure that somebody didn't give us bad data. If they did, we're going to return not found. Otherwise, we're going to put that the gift was started to be built. And then we're going to, again, since we're tracking the entity, we don't have to explicitly save or update anything on a particular field. We can just do save changes and return no content. And finally, when the elf finishes building their gift, they're going to go in and update it. And then we're going to also want to update the child object. So what we're doing is we're taking in an integer, which is going to be the gift ID. We'll go ahead and finish it. Try to find the gift. Hopefully that gift is also tied to a child. If either of those are not found, we'll return a not found. If they are found, we're going to update the two objects again. Set to is complete is true on the gift object, and then set the child's object of ready for delivery to true. Any questions so far? One thing that you can do here too is if your business logic starts to get pretty insane or super complex, you can still bring services in and inject an injectable. So dependency injection still works. So you can start pulling out some of your logic, making it a little more unit testable if you want to have your service files, your business logic files, whatever you want to call them. That's one thing that's been pretty nice too, is if anything gets crazy, you can still kind of flow out or build out from here. All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and start this. And we're going to use the Swagger to create. So we can have a post here. And right now, we have no protection on our endpoints. So if a bad child, bad elf, bad whatever could come in here, create a child, update a good one to not getting gifts, an elf can mark all of the items as done, so there's nothing in their work queue. Whatever malicious thing can happen. But we can create a child object, which should return a 201. We can then get them all, which will return that one child we just created, everything at index 1. And yeah. And then because this should be built as true and already being built as done, the needing built queue is also going to be empty, which it is. So our API is working as expected there. So I think the next step we're going to do is, again, when we have some of those malicious actors, we're going to start adding authentication and authorization, just so Santa's the only one who can change the child objects and the elves are the only ones that can change the gifts. Nobody can really hijack those in production or in real life and steal those and mess with any of that. So the first thing we're going to do up here, if we start adding roles, is we're going to do a builder.services.add authentication. See if I can spell right today. And then we're going to do the add JWT auth with add JWT bearer, and we're going to do a builder.add authorization. Sorry, builder.services.add authentic authorization. So what that'll do is now our API is going to start looking for authentication and authorization. And we're also going to want to, just so I don't screw up, I'm going to steal some of this over here. We're going to want to, one thing that you're going to have to do to have authorization in a bearer is add CORS. It'll give you a CORS error if you don't, unfortunately. I'll go ahead and put this in here and explain what's going on here. So it looks like I got a little, I already have this. So what this is doing, this is adding CORS, it's adding JWT bearer as our auth mechanism, and then we're going to add our authorization. So we're going to have two different policies. We're going to have the Santa policy, and we're going to have the require elf policy. Those two policies are going to require those roles are present in the JWT token. That's about it. And then for any endpoint that we want to add this to, we can add just this to the end, the require authorization. Mike kind of dug in a little deeper. If you want to have additional authorization parameters, you can limit it to scopes, audiences, all those fun jazz that basically comes with a JWT token. Right now, because we're just testing locally and I'm not hooking this up to Azure AD, we're just going to do a simple one of require the role. So we'll go here. And I got one more.
Typed results class, is that standard, the standard object, I guess, the .NET normal APIs?
Yeah, so you're talking about this?
Oh, you're using typed results somewhere.
Yeah, so that's also for the created, I believe, and there's a few other in there. So your created at action will be in there. There's a few other ones too, so if you want to start asserting on like your return types as well, you can do that as well. So we'll just throw that on those for right now, just real quick here. And if we go back to our page here, we're going to refresh. So now I don't have any roles. We back? Hey!
Are you on the HDMI now? Or?
Yeah.
This is
Your ground spot's working? I guess I don't know if you
I don't need it. It's connected.
Okay.
Are you connected over HDMI?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
We fixed the HDMI thing, so we're working. All right. So, as expected, not only did the IT team shut us off for trying to access this, but we also got a 401 not authorized. So we were double denied access to this endpoint. So what we can do as of .NET 7, which is a cool new tool, I don't know if you've ever tried to test roles in Azure AD before. It typically winds down to you're going to assign somebody a role. AD is going to then take 15 to 30 minutes sometimes to propagate. You're going to have to double, triple check and make sure you cleared your cache. Then grab that token. Hopefully it made the change. If not, you're going to wait another 10 minutes. And then you'll hit your endpoint just to hope that your authorization and authentication works. Mike kind of touched on this a little bit. There's this cool new tool called .NET User JWTs, where you can create JWT tokens and test them locally. So this will create a JWT token with whatever scopes, roles, audiences, any of that sort of jazz that you specify, which is really sweet because then I can just create a token here. So let's do one. This is going to have the Santa role in it.
I think this is my favorite feature that you're on that.
I've spent probably a day or two just waiting on AD roles to propagate all the way through. At least in my...
The Wi-Fi, we started, you can see the Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's do that because it might be quicker than my hotspot. So you can go to your favorite jwt.io. I think Microsoft has one. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue, but you can use it as well. And I had this issue before.
I think it's JWTMS.ms.
Is it MS? Okay. This is where your role and all of your audiences. You can also have scopes here, so I specified a scope as well. And you can go through here and test this. There is a slight issue, and it might be a me issue, but I've been testing it a couple times. Sometimes, and maybe it's because I got this space at the end, sometimes the signature is invalid. And I believe I saw, yeah.
But it's signed on your mobile machine, right? So this won't verify that. That was the way it works.
Let's try. I've seen it. I've seen an invalid signature on JWT, and then it tells me that it was invalid for my curl as well. But let's try. So we're gonna have multiple windows open here because we need a .NET run. Let's do that in a different window. So if I try to do just a simple curl command to I probably don't even need to give it a header. s:\local host, and we're at 5001. We'll see we got hello world, but if I try to do the child endpoint that we did, I can't even get there because I don't have a bearer token. So if we throw a header on here, and assuming the token generated correctly, and assuming I type everything right, we're going to steal this.
You have space.
Yeah. Extra super careful. Hey, and we got an empty array because we don't have any children. So That'll allow you to test your API endpoints locally. You can create bearer tokens essentially then easily to your heart's content, especially if you want to start doing like conjoined roles. You can also do inheritance or hierarchy with roles too. So it'll make testing a lot of those scenarios out as well a lot easier if you're going to start doing hierarchies of like, your read, write, and reporting, all those kind of flows if you're going to start implementing those. I think the next thing we're going to jump into is deploying to Azure. So the easiest way I found to deploy to Azure is using Docker Compose. One thing that I think I've fought for probably way longer than I'd like to admit is this Kestrel config. For some reason, Kestrel on your local machine will figure out what you're trying to tell it to do and map all your things in Docker correctly. However, when you go to deploy it, it just doesn't. So you can explicitly tell it what ports you're going to be looking at. We're going to throw that in our app settings. And I'm going to create a Docker file here. And then we're also going to be using Azure Container Apps, which if you haven't used those before, they're pretty sweet because you can, let's make this Docker file. It's like Kubernetes minus all of the pain that comes with Kubernetes. It gives you your scalability automatically. It gives you a lot of that recovery and auto retries, relive, and you can do a lot of the configurations and the pros of the resiliency of Kubernetes without having to deal with actually running your own cluster and becoming an expert basically in Kubernetes, Docker, all this other stuff. You can containerize your solution and then throw it out there. It's also a nice step in that direction if you think your organization wants to go to Kubernetes. This is a little bit of a middle ground of you can start containerizing your solutions, you can deploy them here in a Kubernetes-like environment, and then you can start to see like, is this something we want to do? We'll go ahead and steal this Docker file. So, what this is saying we're going to use the .NET 7 as an SDK base. We're going to name this step builder env. We're going to have our working directory. We're going to copy everything. The other thing that's fun when you use any sort of authentication or authorization, especially when you start bringing in cores, you have to figure out the whole certificate issue. So you'll have, in this case, I created a local self-signed certificate that we're going to use in our deployed environment. You can go ahead, you can eventually get a real one, but this will work for at least an example's sake and get you going. And what that's doing here is we're going to I'll steal that from over here as well. Or I think I threw the command in here. And then there's some container apps extensions we'll need for the AZ. I thought I threw it in here, maybe I didn't. Where are you? Here it is. So this is how you create a local cert that will actually be a .pfx file. My password is super secure. It's ASDF, so don't hack me, please. We're just going to steal the one I have because I know it works. And for future me, I'm going to throw this in here as well. I thought I copied it. Did I not? So then we'll have our Docker file here. That'll get us to our container. And now we're going to need to go to the next step, which is going to be taking the Docker Compose. So we're going to expose our ports. So because this application is a 5000, 5001, we're going to expose those. One limitation for Azure Container Apps today is you can only have a single ingress port. So if you want to be live on multiple ports, you're going to have some sort of load balancer or something fronting your container app or APEM. And then we're going to map these, and then we're going to also tell it to use the cert we just got. Here's the password for the cert, and then we'll go through and do that. And I'm going to create and because I didn't commit all of these to memory, we're going to have some variables. We're going to have a resource group called ACW.NET user group. The location we're going to use is Central US. This is our ACR name. Let's throw some numbers at the end because I created that already. So go ahead and declare all those variables. Now I'm going to create my resource group, which is going to use the variable up above. Assuming I don't need to do AZ login, it did let me go. Cool. And then we're going to create a container registry. And then this next step was the step I was talking about with the, technically if you're a wizard and awesome, you can totally build all of your containers, images in Azure, so it'll look at this instead of having to do it locally. I am not that good, so I still use Docker locally, but it'll start building that. And then for every container app, you're going to need an environment. An environment is the level that you basically tell all your stuff to start running in. And we'll wait till that's built. And then that environment also kind of overarches a lot of the container apps individually. So for example, the internal only, you can have container apps that will only communicate on the Azure backbone. You can be as loose or as strict as you want. You can have container to container, you can have environment lockdown, or you can have on the Azure backbone. So it's just depending on how close, how loose, or how tight you want your security to be. So you can even go another level if you had it open to the world. Your container app can also lock it down and say like, no, you're not going to talk outside of the Azure backbone or what have you.
I know with like the app servers for the container apps, you the SSH into the container to be able to like debug it when it was out there. And that was kind of a little bit of an indirect way to connect, you know, like tunnel.
Yeah.
Is it the same with the container app?
It's not. There's a console that they provide for you, and you can actually pick if you want to use, I think it's bash and one other, or you can actually give it a custom command as well. And I'll show that off here. That's actually what I had to do debugging, because I got my local working and the one up there wasn't. And I was like, all right, I'm going to curl 5,000, and that's how I figured out, like, my app is running, there's a configuration error here. And then you'll notice it does need a log analytics workspace. If you don't provide one, it'll create one for you. That's where a lot of your logs go as far as the container spinning up and down, any events triggered. And you can actually invoke your Docker Compose directly with the Azure CLI. So we're going to do a container app compose create, give it the resource group, give it the environment, and give it our compose file. Ooh, that doesn't look good. What did I do wrong? Wait, what? What are you mad about? Compose create. Looks like it's a Python error. Maybe. Did I not? Oh, I never copied the actual code over. All right. There we go. And then this is the limitation I was talking about earlier. Because we do have 2 ports specified, it's asking me to pick which one I want to use. So we'll do 5,000. And then it's going to go through and it's going to create it. It's going to deploy our Docker image. It's going to put the Docker image in the ACR. It's then going to point the environment to it and then create an apps, a container app for it to live in. And while it's doing that, we can pull this up in Azure. So if I go back to, I think it was the walkthrough, I called it this, and this does take a few minutes. So we'll go ahead and start pulling this stuff up. So here's my resource group. my container registry. It created a second one, and the environment. I must not have specified. Oh, I missed the parameter on this one to specify a container app. Or,
ACR.
yeah, an ACR, a container registry, so it created another one, which is good if you want to keep your files light. It is smart enough too to recognize if it's deployed recently too, so it won't keep creating log services or ACRs. It already knows I created these. I'm going to keep pointing to them, which is nice. Oh, what are you mad? And our environment wasn't quite finished setting up. One thing I will say is creating and deleting environments do take time, and there isn't a good, Microsoft doesn't have a good like indicator today on if it's ready to go. So the best thing I found is you just kind of keep running it, and eventually it'll be ready for you. I think creating and deleting both take about 5 to 10 minutes per operation. And in the meantime, I think I do have, one thing we could do is like the Food Network. I got a, oh wow, it's already done example. So when you were talking about connecting into them, there's actually a console thing right here. Oh, is this not? I thought this was working.
Here's at 0, so I don't know. Because you probably had it scaled to 0.
Oh,
Nothing, the containers aren't running if you hit the endpoint.
yeah, I wonder if I,
Spin it up since it's serverless.
there we go. So maybe now it's running now that I hit it and it, there we go. So you can SH into it, or you can use bash. Because we're using a Linux box, we can do like apt upgrade, apt install curl, right? Unable to locate. Is it update, not upgrade? There we go. Because it's an image, it has very little things working, very little links behind the scenes, so we can actually now curl our HTTP localhost 5000, and we should get back hello world. Oh, I need dash I think, right? Oh, those are forward slashes. Oh, I think it's the other way. It's colon on the other side, huh? Dash I HTTP : localhost. And we got our 200, and then the hello world. So if we try to hit our endpoint, our other endpoint, we'll get a 401. And we got a 401 because that's deployed, and we don't have that. We can also go here and do dash here, and our Swagger is all live and good to go because it's not protected as well. And we can actually go back to the one we did for this demo, which was this one, because it looks like it's done, and assume, hey, it's working too. I think that's the things I think were really big to me. There's a lot of this talk came from the fundamentals of minimal APIs. The biggest things I think I've learned that I'm going to use even outside of minimal APIs is that generating the JWT tokens locally, I think that's huge, because then you don't have to create real users in whatever identity provider you're using, which can be quick or slow depending on that. Minimal APIs now also do return types, and they also will return the actual types they're returning to, like string literals or strings, ints, all that sort of stuff, which didn't exist before, which made testing a lot harder. So now that that's there, you can write a lot of like your spec flow testing around all of your endpoints and whatnot. So I will say one downside I did notice is unit testing is a little bit difficult because you don't have a controller and specific methods to hit. You kind of have to go a level higher if you're going to want to unit test this. That's where I think if you start getting business logic, that's going to be pretty complex. You're going to want to start pulling those into services so you can start unit testing that from there. But other than that, I think it's a fun tool. I think it reminds me a lot of like some of those JavaScript Node APIs where we're going to get rid of all that stuff in, CS 101 that was like, I'm not going to explain to you, you just need all this junk, and then you can write a system.out.print, and, 300 or 400 level class will explain what the rest of the junk is. You don't need the junk anymore, which is kind of cool. It makes, I think, C# a little more approachable, which is, I think, a path that Microsoft's kind of going down as well. So, yeah. Is there any other questions, follow-ups?
I guess with introduced the minimal API in .NET 6, and they've obviously enhanced it a bit more. Do you think there's still like some shortcomings with it? I mean, you talked about the unit testing, but if you were to like develop a API that's probably gonna stand the test of time for a while, that sort of thing, it might evolve more complex things. Would you probably choose the conventional approach still, or I've noticed sometimes if you want to customize like Swagger, they have annotations, but then you can't really put a comment, right, to generate some custom Swagger stuff. That's one example I can think of, but
I think I tried to get the Swagger comments to work, and I couldn't quite figure out if that's not quite it. So when in your traditional Swagger APIs, I think you're talking about like here, you can define like the parameters, you can define the outputs, the inputs, the response types. I couldn't quite figure out how to do that yet. I don't know if that's a limitation or maybe I just didn't find the right Google page yet. The other thing I think, in traditional applications, when you start defining like, your services, your repositories, all your business logic, and start really building out an application, your startup and your program.cs end up being huge anyway. This is just another thing to throw into that one file. So I think if you're going to start building like a monolithic application or something that's going to be used, like you said, the test of time, that's going to be big, this file is going to get out of hand very quickly. Because even like this dumb little API, we're at 105 lines, and I don't think I could have been less generous with the spacing, but still all we have at the end of the day is very basic Swagger defined, and 7 endpoints, and we're at over 100 lines. So you multiply that by, you're going to have business logic that's going to be a lot more complicated than this. That's where I think that whole, we can still use services, we can still dependency inject, help make it usable. I think this is a good, I need to get something out there quickly, and then I'm going to iterate and maybe make it a more permanent solution, or you can then also pivot to being more of what you'd call like a traditional API, I think. So I think there's going to be a size limit that you hit where you're just like, this file's too long, I'm not going to read it.
I guess if it's, like you said, approachable for new people who are like, oh, let me try to see C#.NET, and you get running pretty quick.
Yeah. Or if you're doing like the quote-unquote microservice, right? Like maybe this is a very single responsibility API that's not going to ever be huge, but I can spin it up real quickly, I can deploy it in a container. Maybe it's 200 lines, but those 200 lines never change. Maybe that's also another option if you're going to build smaller microservices.
You might be able to put some of these methods into like an extension method as well, right? Where you could just have one line in this file that points over to an extension method that pulls it all out, makes it look. At that point, there you kind of goes back to where you were to start with. So
getting back to like just a typical controller.
Right.
Yeah.
I think an interesting potential, and it'll take a little while for the community to start putting this together and build it out and everything, but in the Node.js world anyways, you see a similar pattern, but other frameworks that come along and put other patterns on top of that style of pattern. And so you kind of almost, I can kind of see how you can almost start to open up the door for different patterns beyond just controllers. And
Like a composable design.
yeah. I think an interesting one would be is if you had a comment, if your backend service has common patterns can you auto-generate your minimal API endpoints by, reflection and moving over your common service patterns.
Yep.
Some things with like Mediator, kind of a similar thing where it's like you're routing a request to a service, basically. So,
I've seen that too with like, I wonder if it's another step or two off, but like even like your CRUD operations for like your repository level, you can do like type T and then just extend that in all of your normal classes and then you get all the CRUD operations for free. It'd be cool to see. I'm sure somebody's probably already creating an extension in.
Yeah, you can go, just an extension, go map CRUD as T.
Yeah. And then all of your CRUD operations are just free, especially if it's just like a use CRUD at the top and then all your business API is the only thing defined here. That could be cool too.
I suppose Microsoft's probably like, well, we'll leave that to the community.
That's somebody else's problem. That's how somebody's going to get their next MVP. Well, if there's any other questions or whatnot, feel free to reach out. I'll post those Advent calendars in the Slack and then also the link to this. Mike, do you have a link to your slides? I can post that there too, or if you want to post it.
I'll do it too.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'll post it on the line.
Sweet. There's no other questions?
Mike or Alec? Good stuff, guys. As always, learn something. Not